Imagine for a moment that you are a traveler in the ancient world. You've just reached the gates of a magnificent city, the crown jewel of an empire. But instead of the bustling sounds of trade and celebration, there is a haunting, heavy silence. The local markets are empty, the temples are overflowing with frantic prayers, and a strange, invisible force is dismantling the population faster than any invading army ever could. Throughout history, humanity's greatest adversary hasn't been other nations or even the elements. It has been the microscopic world. We often focus on the great battles and the rise of kings. But the true authors of our history have frequently been the pathogens that moved silently through our water, our air, and our very homes. These invisible entities have toppled dynasties, halted the greatest conquerors in their tracks, and forced us to reinvent our entire way of life over and over again. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the most dangerous diseases in every time period. And when you see how close we came to the brink of total collapse, you'll realize that our survival as a species is one of the most incredible stories ever told. Our journey begins in the deep mists of prehistory, long before we had the words to describe what was happening to us. For the earliest humans, life was nomadic, and that actually provided a natural defense against large-scale outbreaks. If a small group got sick, they were isolated by the vast distances of the wilderness. But everything changed around 10,000 years ago during the Neolithic Revolution. When we stopped wandering and started farming, we did something that changed the world forever. We began living in close quarters with animals. This was the birth of zoonotic diseases. Cows gave us the ancestors of tuberculosis and smallpox. Pigs gave us influenza, and horses gave us the common cold. Suddenly, we weren't just a part of the food chain. We were a massive, stationary target for viruses and bacteria that had previously only affected the animal kingdom. This was the first great era of disease, where the sheer novelty of these pathogens meant our immune systems were completely defenseless. It was a slow, grinding reality of early agricultural life that would define the health of humanity for the next several thousand years. As we move into the era of the first great civilizations, we find one of the most terrifying diseases of antiquity, the Athenian plague. In 430 years before the Common Era, the city of Athens was the pinnacle of Greek culture, a beacon of democracy and art. But during the second year of the Peloponnesian War, a mysterious sickness arrived at the port of Piraeus. It spread through the crowded city like wildfire. Thucydides, a historian who actually caught the disease and survived, described symptoms that sounded like a feverish nightmare: internal heat, redness of the eyes, and a terrifying loss of the ability to communicate. It hit the soldiers, the politicians, and the common citizens alike. It even took the life of Pericles, the great leader of Athens. This single outbreak effectively crippled the Athenian war effort and changed the course of Western history. To this day, scientists debate what it actually was, perhaps a form of typhus or Ebola, but its legacy was clear. Even the most advanced democracy on Earth could be brought to its knees by a single invisible invader. Moving forward into the height of the Roman Empire, we encounter the Antonine Plague in the 2nd century of the Common Era. At this time, Rome was at its absolute peak, ruling over 60 million people from Britain to the Middle East. But when soldiers returned from a campaign in the East, they brought back a passenger that would devastate the empire. Many historians believe this was the first time smallpox made a massive appearance on the world stage. It affected everyone from the lowest slave to the co-emperor Lucius Verus. At its height, reports suggest that thousands of people were passing away every single day in the city of Rome alone. The loss of life was so great that the Roman legions struggled to find enough recruits, and the economy began to stagnate as the labor force dwindled. This was the beginning of the long, slow decline of the Western Roman Empire. It proved that even a superpower built on iron and law could be hollowed out from the inside by a microscopic pathogen. But the true king of ancient disasters was yet to come. In the 6th century, the plague of Justinian struck the Byzantine Empire. This was the first recorded appearance of the bubonic plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. It arrived in the capital of Constantinople via grain ships from Egypt, carrying infected fleas on the backs of rats. The devastation was almost incomprehensible. Some contemporary accounts claim the city lost 40% of its population. The Emperor Justinian himself contracted the disease, but was one of the few who managed to survive. He had been on the verge of reuniting the old Roman Empire, reclaiming the lost lands of Italy and North Africa. The plague put an end to those dreams instantly. The tax base vanished, the armies melted away, and the empire was forced into a defensive posture that would last for centuries. This was the event that truly marked the end of the ancient world and the beginning of the Middle Ages. The biological barrier it created between the East and the West would shape the map of Europe and the Mediterranean for 1,000 years. As we enter the medieval period, we have to talk about leprosy. While it wasn't as fast or as explosive as the plague, it was perhaps the most socially devastating disease of the era. Leprosy was a slow, progressive illness that caused visible disfigurement, leading to a level of social stigma that we can barely imagine today. In medieval Europe, being diagnosed with leprosy was often treated as a living exit from society. Victims were forced to live in isolated colonies, wear special clothing, and ring bells to warn others of their approach. It wasn't just a physical ailment, it was a spiritual and social isolation. The fear of the unclean shaped medieval architecture, law, and religious thought. It reminds us that sometimes, the way society reacts to a disease is just as dangerous as the disease itself. It created a culture of exclusion that lasted until the advent of modern antibiotics. Then came the 14th century, and the return of a familiar nightmare, the Black Death. This is arguably the single most impactful event in human history. Between 1347 and 1351, the bubonic plague returned with a vengeance, sweeping across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. It traveled along the Silk Road and through maritime trade routes, reaching every corner of the known world. The statistics are mind-boggling. Some regions lost up to 60% of their population. It was so intense that it felt like the end of the world to those living through it. But the aftermath was even more significant. Because there were so few people left, the value of labor skyrocketed. The old systems of serfdom began to collapse, as peasants could now demand higher wages and better conditions. This led to the rise of the middle class and laid the groundwork for the Renaissance. The Black Death was a horrific tragedy, but it also acted as a massive reset button for human civilization, forcing a move away from the rigid structures of the past and toward a more dynamic, modern economy. As we move into the Age of Discovery in the 15th and 16th centuries, the story of disease takes on a global, and much more tragic, dimension. When European explorers reached the Americas, they brought with them a cocktail of diseases that the indigenous populations had never encountered: smallpox, measles, and the flu. Because the inhabitants of the Americas had no immunity to these old-world pathogens, the results were catastrophic. Some estimates suggest that 90% of the population of the Americas was lost in the decades following contact. This great dying was so massive that it actually changed the Earth's climate. With millions of farmers gone, the forests regrew so rapidly that they pulled massive amounts of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, contributing to a period known as the Little Ice Age. This era showed the power of biological exchange to reshape entire continents and reminds us that sometimes, the most effective weapon in a conquest isn't a sword or a gun, but a sneeze. The 18th and 19th centuries were defined by a different kind of invisible enemy: cholera. As the Industrial Revolution took hold, people began flocking to cities that weren't prepared for the massive influx. Sanitation systems were non-existent, and human waste often flowed directly into the same rivers people used for drinking water. Cholera, a waterborne bacterial infection, thrived in these conditions. It caused incredibly rapid dehydration, often taking a person from perfect health to a critical state in less than 24 hours. It struck London, Paris, New York, and Kolkata with terrifying regularity. But this danger also led to one of our greatest triumphs. In 1854, Dr. John Snow mapped the victims of a London outbreak and traced them back to a single water pump on Broad Street. This was the birth of modern epidemiology. It forced governments to invest in massive public works projects to provide clean water and sewage systems. Our modern clean cities are the direct result of the battle we fought against cholera. In the late 19th century, another slow-moving giant dominated the world: tuberculosis, often called the White Plague. For a long time, it was actually romanticized in literature and art, associated with the sensitive soul of poets and musicians. But in reality, it was a brutal, wasting disease that affected every level of society. It was the leading cause of departure in the Western world for decades. Because it was an airborne bacterial infection, it thrived in the cramped, poorly ventilated tenement housing of the industrial era. The fight against tuberculosis led to the development of the first sanatoriums, where the importance of fresh air, sunlight, and nutrition was first recognized. It also drove the development of the first vaccines and antibiotics in the early 20th century. Tuberculosis was a constant, haunting presence that shaped the very way we designed our homes and our hospitals. The 20th century brought the most intense singular outbreak in human history: the 1918 Spanish flu. Coming right at the end of the first global conflict, this viral pandemic infected a third of the world's population. What made it particularly terrifying was that it didn't just affect the very young or the elderly. It had a strange W-shaped curve, hitting healthy adults in their 20s and 30s the hardest. In a matter of single months, it was estimated to have taken more lives than the entire 4 years of the war that preceded it. It moved at a speed enabled by modern transportation, jumping from continent to continent on troop ships and trains. It forced the world to realize that in a globalized era, a health threat anywhere is a health threat everywhere. It led to the creation of the first international health organizations and the modern specialized labs we rely on today. During the middle of the 20th century, another disease struck fear into the hearts of parents everywhere: polio. It wasn't the most widespread disease, but its effects were highly visible and devastating, often causing paralysis in children. The image of the iron lung, a massive metal cylinder that helped patients breathe, became a symbol of the struggle between human ingenuity and biological tragedy. The race for a vaccine between Jonas Salk and Albert Sabin was one of the first major public science events, with millions of people donating to the cause. When the vaccine was finally successful, it sparked a global effort to eradicate the disease, showing that when humanity works together, we can actually remove a threat from the face of the earth. The late 20th century saw the emergence of a new and deeply misunderstood challenge: the HIV/AIDS pandemic. Appearing in the early 80s, it was a disease that attacked the very system designed to protect us, the immune system. For a long time, it was a source of massive social stigma and fear, much like leprosy was in the Middle Ages. But it also triggered an unprecedented era of activism and scientific collaboration. It changed the way we talk about health, privacy, and human rights. The development of antiretroviral therapies transformed it from a certain critical diagnosis into a manageable chronic condition for millions of people. It showed that even when the science is complex and the social hurdles are high, we have the capacity to adapt and overcome. In the 21st century, we have faced a return of the fast pandemics, with outbreaks like SARS, MERS, and most recently the global health crisis that began in 2020. These events have shown us that despite all our advanced technology, we are still vulnerable to the same basic biological rules that affected our ancestors 10,000 years ago. We live in a world where a virus can travel halfway around the globe in less than a day. Our strength lies in our ability to sequence a genome in hours and develop new types of protection in months, a speed that would have seemed like a miracle to the victims of the Black Death. We are in a constant arms race with the microscopic world, and our greatest tools are no longer just blankets and prayers, but data and global cooperation. When we look back at the most dangerous diseases in every time period, we see a recurring pattern of vulnerability and resilience. Each era had its invisible wall, a pathogen that challenged the limits of our knowledge and our social structures. The Athenian plague tested the limits of democracy, the Black Death tested the limits of the feudal system, and cholera tested the lives of the industrial cities. In every case, we were forced to evolve. We developed better sanitation, better medicine, better laws, and a better understanding of our own biology. We are the survivors of 1,000 separate end-of-the-world scenarios. The psychological impact of these diseases is something we often overlook. Throughout history, the presence of a dangerous disease has shaped how humans interact with one another. It has influenced who we trust, where we travel, and how we view the stranger at our gates. It has fueled both the best of our nature, the bravery of doctors and nurses, and the worst of our nature, the search for scapegoats, and the spread of misinformation. These pathogens haven't just affected our bodies, they have shaped our minds and our cultures. It is also worth reflecting on the role of inequality in the history of disease. While viruses and bacteria don't have a political agenda, their impact has often been felt most heavily by the most vulnerable members of society. From the tenements of 19th-century London to the modern-day struggle for vaccine access in developing nations, the battle against disease is inextricably linked to the battle for a more equitable world. We have learned that a world where some people are left defenseless is a world where everyone is at risk. Public health is the ultimate collective good. The environmental factor is another crucial piece of the puzzle. The clearing of forests, the expansion of cities, and the change in global temperatures all play a role in how diseases move from the wild into the human population. The Neolithic revolution brought us close to livestock, and today, our massive global footprint is bringing us into contact with pathogens in remote areas that we never used to visit. The history of disease is, in many ways, the history of our changing relationship with the planet. To prevent the next great outbreak, we have to look not just at the medicine, but at how we inhabit the earth. One of the most fascinating aspects of this history is how it has influenced our art and philosophy. The dance macabre in medieval art, the romantic movement's obsession with the fragile hero, and even the modern obsession with zombie movies are all echoes of our ancestral fear of contagion. We process our biological vulnerability through our stories. These diseases have given us a vocabulary for talking about the temporary nature of life and the importance of our connection to one another. They remind us that for all our pride, we are still part of a larger, often invisible, biological system. As we look to the future, the danger is changing. We are facing the challenge of antibiotic resistance, where the bacteria we thought we had defeated are learning to fight back. We are exploring the potential of gene editing, which could help us eradicate diseases like malaria, but also raises massive ethical questions. We are building global surveillance systems that can detect an outbreak long before it becomes a pandemic. We have more power than ever before, but the world we are managing is also more complex than ever. The story of the most dangerous diseases is not a journey into despair, but a journey into triumph. Think about the fact that smallpox, a pathogen that took the lives of hundreds of millions of people over thousands of years, was officially eradicated in 1980. That is one of the greatest achievements in the history of our species. It proved that we aren't just victims of the microscopic world, we have the power to master it. We are the only beings on Earth who can study their own predators and find ways to neutralize them. This history also teaches us humility. We can never truly finish the battle against disease. Evolution never stops, and new challenges will always emerge. But we have a head start that our ancestors didn't. We have the collective knowledge of every previous generation's struggle. We have the maps drawn by John Snow and the research done by Louis Pasteur. We are standing on the shoulders of everyone who ever looked into a microscope or cared for a sick stranger. Every time you wash your hands, every time you drink a glass of clean water, and every time you receive a routine health checkup, you are benefiting from the lessons we learned during these dangerous time periods. We have turned the terrifying mysteries of the past into the boring routines of the present. That transition from panic to protocol is the definition of progress. We have taken the invisible monsters and turned them into data points. But we must never forget the cost, the millions of individual stories of loss and survival that make up these grand historical trends. Behind every statistic of the Black Death or the Spanish flu was a person who was loved and a life that was cut short. Their experiences are what drove us to find better ways. Their struggles are why we have the laboratories and the public health systems we do today. We honor them by continuing the search for better ways to protect the human family. The role of the detective in health history is one of the most underrated paths. Scientists who hunt for the source of a virus in a remote forest or who track the movement of a bacteria through a city are the heroes of our age. They are the ones who stand between us and the return of the ancient silences. Their work is the modern equivalent of the knights of old, patrolling the borders of our world to keep the shadows at bay. As we move forward into a new century, the definition of a dangerous disease will continue to shift. But the human spirit that faces these dangers will remain the same. We are curious, we are resilient, and we are fundamentally social beings. These traits have made us vulnerable, but they are also what allowed us to survive. We share our space, our air, and our lives. And though that brings risks, it also brings the collaboration and care needed to overcome any challenge. The history of humanity is a grand drama played out against a backdrop of microscopic change. We are the architects of cities, the creators of technology, and the seekers of beauty. But we are also the survivors of the Athenian plague, the Black Death, and the Spanish flu. We carry the history of these battles in our DNA and in our cultures. We are a species that has looked into the eyes of the greatest dangers and found a way to bridge the gap to a healthier tomorrow. So when you think about the vastness of human history, remember the small things. Remember the bacteria that changed an empire and the virus that shifted a climate. But most of all, remember the people who learned from those moments. We are the heirs to a legacy of survival that spans 10,000 years. We have faced the most dangerous diseases in every time period. And we are still here, looking forward, asking questions, and building a world where the invisible world is no longer a source of terror, but a field of study. The stars are beautiful, but the world under the microscope is just as vast and just as critical to our story. It is a world of incredible speed and incredible adaptability, but it is a world we have learned to navigate. We have come a long way from the silences of the ancient cities. Today, our voices are louder, our vision is clearer. We are the guardians of our own health, and as long as we keep learning and keep caring for one another, the story of humanity will continue, one victory over the invisible world at a time. The road ahead will surely have its challenges, but if history has taught us anything, it's that we are much stronger than the things that try to break us. Keep looking forward, stay curious, and remember that our greatest strength is each other.